He was young, tired, and desperate, just another man fighting to survive in a world stacked against him. His pockets were empty, his hope was fading, and every door he knocked on was slammed in his face. Until one day, he made a choice that would change everything. He approached a billionaire for help. What happened in that moment was more than just an encounter between rich and poor. It revealed the ugly truth about power, privilege, and race. And once you hear the reply, you'll never forget it. It started like any other morning. The city was alive with the sounds of traffic, footsteps, and hurried voices, but for Marcus, it was just another day of survival. He was 22, a young black man carrying the weight of dreams that always seemed just out of reach. Every morning, he walked past glass towers filled with people in expensive suits, while he wore the same faded jacket and shoes that had long lost their shine. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't reckless. He worked small jobs when he could find them, skipped meals to make rent, and still managed to send a little money back to his mother. Marcus had learned early that the world didn't play fair for people who looked like him. Still, he kept his head down, hoping that one day, things would change. But life has a way of pushing those already on the edge even closer to the fall. That morning, as he sat on a cold bench, watching people rush past without even a glance, he realized just how invisible he had become. What he didn't know was that soon, he would cross paths with someone whose wealth and influence could rewrite his story, or break it beyond repair. Marcus's life had always been about endurance. Every day, he fought battles others never even noticed. Subtle stares, locked car doors as he walked by, shopkeepers' suspicious eyes tracking his every move. He told himself it didn't matter, that he could push through. But sometimes the world has a way of cornering you until there's nowhere left to run. That day began like countless others, empty stomach, restless sleep, and a half-hearted search for work. Marcus walked the crowded downtown streets, resume folded in his pocket, rehearsing the same words he'd said 100 times before, "I'm hardworking, willing to learn, just give me a chance." But every office he entered had the same polite rejection, the same glance that traveled from his skin to his clothes before dismissing him entirely. By noon, exhaustion pressed on his shoulders. He ducked into a small diner, not to eat, but just to rest. The waitress spotted him immediately, her smile thin, her eyes cautious. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sharp, as though his presence alone was a problem. Marcus raised his hands in surrender. "Just water, please." She nodded, but kept staring, as if waiting for him to do something wrong. He drank slowly, pretending not to notice, but inside, anger simmered. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a threat. He was just a man, tired and hungry, sitting in a booth. Yet the looks he received told another story, one written long before he was born. When he finally stood to leave, the waitress exhaled audibly, relieved, as if danger had passed. Marcus felt the sting deep in his chest. It wasn't just the water he couldn't afford, it was dignity that seemed forever out of reach. The afternoon brought no relief. As Marcus walked past a luxury car dealership, he couldn't help but pause. Behind the glass wall, spotless vehicles gleamed under bright lights, each one worth more than he'd ever held in his entire life. He pressed his hand against the glass for just a second, imagining himself behind the wheel, imagining a world where success wasn't locked away from him. But before the thought could settle, a security guard appeared inside, staring at him with narrowed eyes, one hand hovering over his radio. Marcus stepped back quickly, ashamed, as though he'd committed a crime by dreaming. That was the moment he realized how deeply the lines were drawn. There were people who belonged in those cars, those offices, those restaurants, and people like him, who never would. Still, survival demanded that he keep moving. His rent was overdue, his cupboards nearly bare, and his mother's voice echoed in his head, "Don't give up, Marcus. You're stronger than this." But how long could strength last when the world refused to bend? As the sun dipped lower, Marcus found himself wandering toward the wealthiest part of the city. Towering buildings of glass and steel reflected golden light, and the sidewalks here were spotless, lined with trees that looked more decorative than real. Every passerby seemed polished, dressed in suits or designer clothes, glancing at Marcus as if he were a stranger trespassing on sacred ground. He tugged his jacket tighter, wishing he could disappear. Then he saw him. A billionaire, famous enough that even Marcus, with no television and no time for gossip, knew his name. He had built empires, appeared in magazines, and was celebrated as a self-made genius. But in that moment, Marcus didn't see the fame, he saw opportunity. He saw a man who could change his life with less effort than it took to sign his name. Marcus hesitated. Approaching someone like that wasn't just bold, it was dangerous. What if he was ignored? What if security dragged him away? What if this man looked at him the way everyone else did, with suspicion and fear? The thought alone made Marcus's stomach tighten. But hunger, shame, and desperation leave little room for hesitation. Slowly, Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding against his ribs. Each step felt heavier, louder, as though the entire world was watching. People on the sidewalk turned to look, some curious, some disapproving, as if Marcus was breaking an unspoken rule by daring to bridge a gap so wide. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The billionaire turned, his polished shoes pausing on the pavement, his face unreadable. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Marcus wanted to explain everything, his struggles, his hunger, his dreams, the countless times he'd been dismissed because of the color of his skin. He wanted to pour out years of pain and ask, just once, for someone with power to see him as human. But before he could speak, he noticed something in the billionaire's eyes. A flicker. A pause. It wasn't kindness, not yet. But it wasn't dismissal either. Marcus took a breath, ready to continue. That's when a voice cut through the air. Harsh. Sharp. Accusing. "Hey! You don't belong here." Marcus turned to see a security guard hurrying toward him, hand already reaching for his belt as if danger was unfolding. The guard's eyes weren't on the billionaire, they were locked on Marcus, and only Marcus. The billionaire said nothing. The crowd around them shifted, watching, whispering. Some pulled out phones, ready to capture whatever came next. Marcus raised his hands instinctively, his chest tightening. I was just, but his words fell apart under the weight of suspicion pressing down on him. The guard's steps quickened. "Step back now," he barked, his tone sharp enough to slice through the air. Marcus froze, his mind racing. Should he run? Should he stand his ground? Every instinct screamed that one wrong move could end his life. The billionaire remained silent, watching. And in that silence, Marcus felt the cruel truth. In this city, his mere presence was considered a threat. The security guard's shouts echoed off the glass walls, sharp and unrelenting. "Step back. Hands where I can see them." His voice carried the authority of someone who believed every word he spoke was law. Marcus froze, his palms raised high, trembling slightly in the harsh daylight. Around him, a circle was forming, onlookers with curious eyes, raised phones, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Some looked concerned, but most looked entertained, as if this unfolding moment was another spectacle in the city's daily theater of humiliation. Marcus's heart thundered in his chest. He hadn't done anything wrong. He had no weapon, no threat, only hunger in his stomach and desperation in his eyes. Yet here he stood, framed as dangerous, guilty by presence alone. The billionaire, still silent, adjusted his cufflinks. His face remained unreadable, but Marcus caught the flicker of hesitation in his gaze. It was the kind of pause that could tilt the entire story, toward mercy or toward silence. The guard's hand hovered near his belt. "I said back up," he barked again, louder this time, his steps closing the gap. Marcus felt the heat of the sun beating down, but his body was cold, every muscle stiff with fear. If I move too fast, they'll say I resisted. If I don't move, they'll say I refused. His thoughts spiraled, racing through headlines he'd read before. Unarmed black man confronted. Tensions rise. Shots fired. He could see himself becoming another statistic, another forgotten name swallowed by the endless cycle of outrage and silence. The crowd pressed closer, the phones recording, angles shifting. Some whispered, "What did he do?" Others muttered, "He looks suspicious." The words cut deep, even though they were based on nothing. Suspicion wasn't an act, it was a verdict handed down long before Marcus had even approached the billionaire. And still, the billionaire said nothing. That silence was louder than the guards shouting. It was heavy, suffocating, a silence that held the weight of centuries. The silence of men who could speak, who could intervene, who could shift the outcome, but chose not to. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to scream, to demand, "Why? Why am I treated this way? Why does my skin turn me into a threat before I even open my mouth?" But his voice caught in his chest, strangled by fear. The guard reached him now, standing just inches away, his eyes hard, hand resting firmly on his weapon. "Down on your knees," he ordered. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The command wasn't just about control, it was about humiliation. To kneel, in front of everyone, for no crime, no reason. Marcus's body trembled. Slowly, he began to lower himself, his knees brushing against the unforgiving pavement. His dignity cracked like glass, splintering with every second. His chest burned, not just from fear, but from shame. The shame of being reduced to nothing more than a suspect in a story he hadn't written. The billionaire finally spoke. His voice was calm, measured, almost detached. "What seems to be the problem here?" The guard stiffened, but didn't move his hand away from his belt. "Just making sure he doesn't cause trouble, sir." Marcus lifted his head, his eyes locking with the billionaire's. He wanted him to see, not just a man on his knees, but a soul breaking under the weight of injustice. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw recognition. A flicker of humanity. But then, the billionaire's gaze shifted back to his polished watch, as though time itself mattered more than the man kneeling before him. The silence returned. And in that silence, Marcus understood. This wasn't just about him. This was about every man who had been told his life was worth less. Every woman who had been silenced. Every child who had been made to feel invisible. His humiliation wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of a system built to keep him exactly where he was now, on the ground, powerless, watched by a crowd that treated his suffering like entertainment. Tears stung his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. The guard leaned closer, his voice low but seething. "If you make one wrong move, you won't be walking away." Marcus's breath caught. He knew it wasn't an empty threat. He could feel it in the guard's posture, see it in his eyes. The smallest twitch, the slightest misunderstanding, and his life would be over. The crowd grew restless. Someone shouted, "Leave him alone. He hasn't done anything." Another voice answered, "Stay out of it, you'll make it worse." Phones kept recording. Dozens of lenses capturing every second, but Marcus knew how these stories went. The footage wouldn't show his innocence. It would be twisted, debated, dissected until the truth was unrecognizable. His mind screamed, "This is it. This is where my story ends." Not with hope, not with justice, but with silence and suspicion. The guard shifted his weight, his hand pressing tighter against the holster. Marcus could almost hear the click, the inevitable moment just seconds away. Then, the billionaire stepped forward. "Enough." His voice was firm this time, cutting through the air. The crowd hushed instantly. Even the guard froze, caught between authority and obedience. The billionaire's eyes settled on Marcus. For the first time, Marcus wasn't sure if he was being seen as a threat, a beggar, or simply a man. But the pause stretched on too long, and doubt flooded Marcus's chest. The billionaire finally spoke again. "He came to me. He asked for help. That doesn't make him a criminal." The guard's jaw tightened. "Sir, I was only ensuring your safety." "My safety?" the billionaire interrupted, his tone sharp. "From what? A man with nothing in his hands but desperation?" Whispers swept through the crowd. The phones tilted higher, capturing every word. Marcus's knees burned against the concrete, his body trembling, but for the first time, the focus shifted. It wasn't on him alone, it was on the billionaire's choice. Would he extend his hand? Or would he turn away, letting Marcus's humiliation stand as the final chapter? The weight of the moment pressed down like a storm. Marcus raised his head, his voice finally breaking through the fear. "Please, don't just watch. See me." His words cut through the silence like glass shattering. The billionaire's eyes darkened, his face unreadable. For a second, Marcus believed that maybe this was the turning point, that maybe someone with power would finally do more than watch. But then the billionaire's gaze hardened. He turned slightly, signaling to his driver. "Get the car." The guard smirked, satisfied. The crowd groaned, some booing, others shaking their heads. The weight in Marcus's chest grew unbearable. As the sleek black car pulled to the curb, Marcus realized the cruelest truth of all: indifference can wound deeper than hatred. And in that moment, kneeling on cold pavement, surrounded by silence and stares, Marcus understood, this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about being erased in plain sight. The billionaire's door opened, his polished shoes stepping forward once more. The world seemed to hold its breath. Would he leave Marcus broken on the ground? Or would he finally do the one thing Marcus had begged for since the beginning, see him as human? The answer hung in the air, heavy, unbearable. And then, fade to black. Marcus eventually stood up from the pavement, knee sore, pride shattered, and spirit heavy. The billionaire had stepped into his car, the guard had walked away, and the crowd had dispersed, leaving Marcus alone with nothing but the echo of their whispers. No help had come. No hand had reached for him. What remained was silence, the same silence he had lived with his entire life. That night, as Marcus lay on a thin mattress in his dim apartment, he replayed the scene in his mind over and over. The faces. The phones. The guard's voice. The billionaire's silence. He thought of what could have happened if he had moved too quickly, if the guard's hand had tightened just a little more on that holster. His body might have been another lifeless figure on the street. His name, another fleeting headline. And that realization cut deeper than the humiliation. It wasn't just what happened, it was how close he had come to disappearing without anyone ever knowing his story. For Marcus, life went on, but never the same. The city still looked at him with suspicion, doors still closed in his face, and opportunities still slipped away before he could grasp them. But inside, something shifted. He carried the weight of that day like a scar, a reminder that the fight was never just about him, it was about every person who had ever been forced to kneel under the weight of injustice. The billionaire moved on, untouched, his empire intact, his silence forgotten by those who watched. But for Marcus, silence became the loudest part of the story. Silence from those with power. Silence from those who could speak. Silence that allowed injustice to live on. And isn't that the truth of racism today? It's not only in the cruelty of those who discriminate, it's in the silence of those who look away. It's in the indifference that lets stories like Marcus's repeat, again and again, until they blur into statistics. Marcus may never get the justice he deserved. His life may remain a struggle, his dreams deferred. But his story is not his alone. It's the story of countless others who walk the same streets, who face the same suspicion, who live with the same fear that one wrong glance, one wrong word, one wrong move could end everything. So the question isn't just what happened to Marcus. The real question is, how many more times will this happen before the world decides enough is enough? Because until we answer that, until silence turns into action, until indifference turns into change, there will be another Marcus tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that. And when that moment comes, will we still look away? Or will we finally see?